So hey, my name's Matt, and I started an app called JamCam, and it's been around a year and a half since we started, maybe actually 2 years. And so today I'll just tell you the whole story, and hopefully you guys can get something out of it. So yeah. So I started school at Queen's. I studied engineering physics. So there, when I was studying at Queen's, I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but I was pretty interested in physics, so I thought I'd study that. And one way or another, I ended up at a really small acoustical engineering firm in Port Credit, which is a nice area down by the water. And while I was there, I did some pretty cool stuff, like we helped design Cineplex theaters. Also, if any of you guys have ever been to a rave where everyone's jumping up and down at the same time, that can actually cause structural damage in the floor. And so we would install these things called TMDs, tune mass dampers, which are these 10,000 kilogram concrete blocks attached to the floor with springs, which would basically prevent structural damage when everyone's jumping and having a lot of fun. But during that time, I became really curious about programming and design, and basically wanted to learn how to build a website. So I turned to Google and more or less had no knowledge about coding for the web. And this is what Google told me I needed to learn. So I kind of got going and started trying tutorials and building stuff for fun. But it really helped to have some kind of a product in mind to build, because otherwise I wouldn't really have been very motivated. So I thought, okay, well, I like music and social networks seem to be kind of cool, so why not try and build something that's kind of like a social network for music sharing, so people can, find new music and share music with their friends and stuff like that. And so basically, while I was at my job for that 1 year after Queen's, just in my free time, I would Google stuff and I would build stuff, and by stuff I mean this product that I had in mind. And this took a lot of time, like 7 or 8 months of just in my free time, building what came to my head for this product. And so finally, after 7 or 8 months of doing it in my free time, I came out with this. So essentially there was a feed and there was just a crap load of features all over the place. Like, this was not an MVP. I didn't know what that was. I just built everything that came to my mind and threw it into a product. So there's a feed, and then you could want stuff from the feed. It would go on your want list. There was all this cool stuff, like it would analyze your library and tell you the temperature of your library, like what kind of music you like, whether it's kind of faster paced or slower paced, would be temperature, song count. It would also show all your friends and your musical compatibility with that friend. So you could see which of your friends have the most similar taste in music to you. And it also did stuff like analyze your library and see what songs most of your friends had that you don't have, so maybe what you're missing out on. So it did just a crap load of features like that. It also did this cool graph, kind of like Super Smash Bros. F-Zero X, there was a video game. Anyway, it would show like your taste in a graphic like that, in a radar graph. And don't ask me why, but it also shows what instrument you play, your favorite artists, your earworms, so what songs are stuck in your head. So clearly there's just 1,000 features here. And it took a long time, but I learned a lot while doing it. And so there's this kind of adage that everyone knows, is that if you build it, they will come. And so I was really excited to launch it, getting really pumped up, and nobody came. So I was a little bit disappointed with that, but I think the motivation of maybe thinking that they would come helped me crazily spend so many nights learning this stuff. And so vibrato is what I called it, and it never got more than 200 users, and most of those were my mom and my friends and stuff like that. So that was interesting. So it's a bit of a Breaking Bad reference for those of you who watched that, but so then I decided, okay, well now I'll try to learn iOS. I thought of a new project, just a simple weather app, much closer to the notion of an MVP this time. So it's live on the App Store if you guys wanted to check it out. It's just called Soul. And it just shows you the weather in words, and then it has this cool like flat design, bouncy animation where you pull down and it has the temperature over the course of the week. And so that took more like a month just of free time work. And so it never got too much attention, but over time it kind of had some crazy spikes. So for example, in 1 month I got over 1,000 downloads. That's in a month. And there's going to be a lot of graphs coming up, so just keep in mind the time frame here. So 1 month, 1,000 downloads. It was so-so, but at the start it was just a couple hundred downloads, and that was it. So yeah. So that was a little disappointing too, but I didn't walk away empty-handed because I kind of realized that I could just build whatever came to my mind, and that was something. That was something really useful. So with that in mind, I decided to quit my job. And I'll never forget just the drive away from Port Credit that one last time, like commuting there every day. It took like sometimes an hour every day there and back. And just the feeling of like looking in the rearview mirror and knowing I wouldn't have to do that again, and being able to have all my time put towards letting the creative juices flow and stuff like that was really, really rewarding. It felt really good. So Australia, I had a trip booked to Australia for many months prior to quitting. So I went on that anyway, even though I now had no income and had to figure out my life. And I was visiting a friend there. And it was actually while I was in Australia that I had this idea. I was kind of thinking, what could I build? What would be a tool someone would use? And we were on a road trip and we had some music playing. And I wanted to open up a camera app and record a video while the music was playing. It's just a really simple problem, but nothing could do that. And so that seemed like a pretty simple problem that might have a potential user base, and so I thought, maybe I'll do that. And I remember I had a discussion with my friend Dave in Australia, and this is kind of something to remember for the end of the presentation. He was saying, it's an interesting idea, but we both kind of agreed that this was kind of like Vine, but for music videos, so it was really limited to a subset of the user base of Vine. And so we never thought that anything like this could ever get as big as Vine or bigger, but let's remember that thought. So I got home. I was living with my parents at the time, so I looked at a house like this, just coded it out full time. Finally, didn't have to go to work, so I could just focus on it. So although I had to learn a lot of new APIs and stuff, it only took a month and a half to code. And so that brings us to JamCam version 1. So it was released in September of 2013, and this is what it looked like. You just, on the left panel, you could pick music from your iPhone, and then you'd swipe to the right, and you would be able to record your video. It would be 15 seconds max. It would play the music while you record your video, and you could also do the use case where you have music playing, and you open the app, and it jumps right to the second screen, so you can get that spontaneous capture. And then the last thing was, there was no social network in it. It's just you share to other apps from the app. So that was version 1. And this time, contrary to my other previous experiences, people liked it. So a friend posted it on Reddit, and it got to the top of the iPhone subreddit. And people were commenting, and they liked it. And that was pretty cool. And also, so I read a bunch of articles about how to get exposure on your startup, and I'm sure you guys have read about you're supposed to get press and how you reach out to press. And so I made a very targeted approach to getting press, and I just researched what types of articles different journalists were writing, and I targeted one in particular with a tweet. I only ever sent one tweet, but this woman, Jordan, she seemed to be writing about stuff that was very similar to JamCam, so I targeted her, and she liked it enough to write an article about it. And so that was probably, this tweet was probably like the happiest or the most excited I've been all throughout JamCam, because it was kind of like the transition between vibrato and soul, which were no one really knew about, and then this, I was like, wow, I've made it. I'm set for life now that I got this tweet. And it wasn't quite like that, but anyway. So October 4th, we got that article, and that was really, really cool. And so a lot of people started reaching out. Like if you get it written up on TechCrunch or Mashable or whatever, people will find your email and they'll reach out to you, or they'll tweet at you and they'll say stuff like, congratulations, or I want to do this or that. And so one such person was named Utsav. And this guy reached out, and he's from India, and he said, Matt, super app. I love the use case and minimal design. And basically he was trying to get me to pay him to develop the Android version of JamCam, because they had a similar app they'd been working on. And so he, it seemed like a natural fit. But the timing wasn't right. I told him, like, I'm not looking to develop this for Android yet. I don't have the money. Trying to grow it on iOS first. So I said, let's stay in touch. All right, so anyway, I'm sure you guys are all wondering about some of the actual numbers, about the results of this. So being on Reddit for the #1 spot ended up bringing 900 downloads in a day for like 3 days in a row. So that was pretty cool. And contrast that to Soul, which got 250 downloads in the first month. That's a pretty cool difference. And then interestingly, TechCrunch only brought just under 500 downloads in that first day when the article was posted. And I was talking to Utsav about this over Skype, and he was saying when he launched his startup and he got everything like TechCrunch, Mashable, you name it, he thought that he was going to be like the #1 app in the world, but it didn't quite do that for him. It wasn't as high as he thought. So I think it's important to maybe curb your expectations a little bit, because some of these press outlets don't have the same sway as they might have originally. Anyway, I think that depends, but yeah. And another thing to note is that if you were to isolate the effect of each of those two things, so Reddit and TechCrunch, I think Reddit would have a very short tail. So it would just have 900 downloads and then kind of go down to 0 after a few days. But TechCrunch, although it is only 500 downloads in that first day, it has a very long tail, meaning that if you ever search for music video app on Google, it shows up on one of the first pages. And so that's free SEO for a very, very long time. So it might be 500 in day 1, but it might be 5 over the course of the next 100 days or 200 days. So anyway, I think there's a lot of value in that as well. And okay, so at this point, only 2 weeks approximately later, a competitor came out named Mindy. And so this was kind of interesting. I thought maybe they were copying us, but then I realized 2 weeks isn't enough time to build and launch an app, so odds were that they didn't copy us. But it's just interesting how different, not discovery, but ideas can come about at the same time in different places. Okay, so that was version 1. Version 2 now, so a month and a bit later, November. Currently it's still, or at this point it was still just me working on it. And so I thought it should probably have a social network built in, a way to watch videos. So built in just that, just simple categories, not as crazy as Vibrato was, with just new videos, the top videos, and your videos. And also in this month, got a little bit of lesser known press, ones you probably wouldn't have heard of, but seemed to have thousands of viewers, and it didn't really help a whole lot. So that was down in that 40 to 70 days after launch period, and we were averaging around 50 or 100 downloads a day, and it didn't help a whole lot. So Utsav reached out again and introduced me to this guy named Sam. Sam was consulting with a company called Event Live, which was in LA, which was acquired by Yahoo around this time. And so Utsav was trying to sell his company. He reached out to Sam for advice, not knowing that Sam was only a consultant, not a co-founder of Event Live. But Utsav found out that Sam was from Canada. He mistakenly thought he was from Toronto, but he's really from Quebec City. And he just decided to introduce us. And so, if you think about it, how the TechCrunch article came from a tweet, and then Utsav came from TechCrunch, and then Sam came from Utsav. Well, Sam came and we sat down and we had coffee and we talked. And we really hit it off. He seemed to have skills that complemented mine. And so after 2 days straight of meeting, we decided to become co-founders on JamCam. We worked out the equity a little bit differently because I'd been working on it for so long, or for a few months. So it wasn't a totally even split, but we were co-founders nonetheless. And so then January was the first version of the app where we started to work together. 2 people on this now instead of 1. That was a really cool transition, although I'm sure most of you are working in teams already in class or whatever it is. And so this is when we got into the DMZ. This is Sam sitting in a beanbag working hard. And we did a bit of dabbling with influencers around this time. So this guy named Tribble reached out, cold emailed me, and he is a kind of like a small celebrity from the States who was on a similar show to The Bachelor, but it was focused in Alabama. It was called Sweet Home Alabama. And so Tribble just had this vision. He was like, Matt, I was dreaming, and I just saw Jamcam becoming as big as Vine, and I had to reach out, and I have to get involved with the app somehow. And so he was really excited about it. And he had a decent following on social media, like around 50,000 followers on Twitter and Instagram. And so we started to talk to him and brainstorm, and he really liked to do these lip sync selfies. Because when the app was originally designed, I thought it would be mostly used for beautiful scenery and then playing your music alongside that. But more often than not, people were kind of turning the camera back on themselves, putting extra effort in to sing along with the video. And that's something he was doing, and I'll talk more about that later. And then we found out that Mindy, that app that we heard about 2 weeks after we launched, had just raised $1.2 million from some of the top VCs in America, or most well-known VCs like Ashton Kutcher and Chris Sacca and a bunch of others. So that was a little bit hard to take because we hadn't raised anything. We came out first, so we deserved all the users, not them. But anyway, that happened, so that was something to deal with. And then this other startup came out called Musical.ly. And I'm not sure if you guys have heard of that app. Has anyone heard of that app? Okay, so a few people have heard of it. Musical.ly was like a complete ripoff of Mindy. It was like the exact same design, almost as though they stole their code. And if I was Mindy, I would have been pretty pissed. I'm not sure if I could have sued, but I mean, it was disgusting what they did. And I'm pretty sure the co-founder or the founder of Musical.ly was living in China at the time, but then he moved to the Valley after he founded it. So just stay tuned I'll tell you more about Musical.ly after, but they launched around that time as well. Also around that time, I got an email from this guy from Universal Music. And I thought it was a prank at first because he was saying he wanted to debut Tiesto's new song on Jamcam. But it turned out not to be a prank. Like this guy was a marketer from Universal Music, it was for real. And he had this idea to use Jamcam to promote Tiesto's new album by getting everyone to be shooting Jamcam videos to his new song, which is kind of something we always had in mind, but he was very proud of himself because he thought of the idea, and so that's what he describes in this email. Okay, so version 2.4 was the first one with the social network. So you can see here, it's when we started to track in our internal analytics platform the downloads per week, or just all the users in the database. And you can see just a bit of gradual increase there in users. So there's a bit of word of mouth. It's a bit more than 1-to-1, so one person downloads, one person shares. It's slightly higher than that ratio. And we did a bit of influencer work, like I said, so where people like Tribble would promote the app, and you can see some spikes there, but nothing crazy. And I've kind of obfuscated the rest of the graph, but you can see where it's going in the background there. Yeah. So version 3, we did a huge update. This is one where Sam and a lot of the people had a lot of input instead of me just thinking what would be best. We went with a brighter color scheme because we thought that our target demographic might like bright colors more than a black interface. Made more efforts towards the social network side of things, profile links, a bunch of stuff like that. And it was around this time that we got some investment from the DMZ and Ryerson Futures and the Ontario Centres of Excellence. So that was really nice because we were kind of finally felt more like a real startup and not just like an idea that I had and then found someone to work on it with me. So that was pretty cool. And then, so the Tiesto thing never actually went through. Tiesto personally chose to go with Snapchat over Jamcam, which I can't really blame him for. But we did get Psy, and so the way it's kind of, the music industry is really complicated, and where the power lies is just really confusing. But in this case, Psy is managed by Scooter Braun projects, and then in this case, Universal had much more sway over Psy than some others of Scooter's artists. So yeah, we actually, when we got this campaign, I was on vacation with my girlfriend at the time in Greece. And so I had to, I was on this beach and we had Wi-Fi, and I had to hit a button to launch this campaign with Psy, this international artist. So it felt really, really cool. But the one kind of thing was that this song kind of sucked. I'm not sure if you guys remember it. It's called Hangover by Psy. That explains it if you don't remember. You know his first, Gangnam Style, everyone's heard of, but Hangover was just this awful song. So unfortunately that didn't go over well with our users or Psy's fans, I guess. But it did bring a lot of attention to our our product. So you can see, I was on this flaky internet monitoring, refreshing our Google Analytics page. And we ended up getting around 4,000 page views a day at the peak, and then it trailed off. Pretty cool how that can come from one person's social media profile. And then concurrent users. Have any of you guys ever had been refreshing Google Analytics, looking at this kind of thing? Yeah, so it's exciting to just be looking at their users real time. They pop up as dots on a map, so you can see where they are and stuff like that. So we had 32, which we thought was pretty good at the time, on it at the peak time. And yeah, so that was pretty interesting. So also we had some unexpected benefits from working with Psy. So there's this guy named Caden Stevenson, which is kind of a young comedy viner with a really young demographic following. And so Sam, my co-founder, essentially reached out to him and explained this whole premise, and he got really excited about it. And so he tweeted, and I believe maybe Vined as well, about this. And so interestingly, even though he has way fewer followers than Psy, and he even got fewer retweets, fewer likes, but because the actual sway he has over his user base was so much higher, this brought enough traffic to our website to crash the whole server. So I think it was several thousand people within seconds came to the website, and that just crashed it. So that's interesting, because there's a few things you can look at. If you don't know much about social media, you'll be oh, this person has 10 trillion followers, so they must be really big. But then the next level is, well, how many likes per post do they get, as opposed to just how many followers they have? And then beyond that is, there's a certain amount of sway that can't really be quantified, which I think is a function of how close a demographic feels to the influencer you're talking about. And so also while I was dealing with the server crashing and launching this thing all while on vacation, I visited this guy who reached out to us from Universal in London, and that was pretty cool. And I don't have much to say there, but one thing is that the reason they chose Jamcam over Mindy was because our videos were landscape and Mindy is portrait. And this is something that we debated for a long time. And it's just funny because it's hard to know what the right answer is, and that was more or less complete luck. So yeah. Okay, so the results version 3. So you can see, and again, this graph isn't cumulative, it's per week. So before we were getting just over 1,000 downloads a week, and then we started to get bumped up to 2,000 downloads a week. And that was more or less facilitated by Psy and Caden and a few other influencers doing some social pushes. So we really started to realize that influencer marketing is pretty critical for growth, for us at least. Okay, so version 4. So you can see we did kind of a similar design to version 3, but we really cleaned up the interface a lot, added in some really fancy effects because I was getting better and better at programming. It was still me doing all the programming here, and Sam was kind of, he had a lot of music industry relationships, and he was doing a lot of the hustling to get our product in front of people in the music industry quite a bit. So now that we had a bit of investment money, we could experiment with not just free promotion, but also some paid promotion. And so I'm sure you guys have heard of CPI, so where you pay for an install. It's become really big, especially, I don't think it was even available on Twitter at this time. Now they've got this integrated button, same with Instagram. But at the time, this was kind of less of a well-known method to promote your app. And so there are a lot of kind of black market companies that would essentially accept money in return for kind of fake downloads that would artificially pump you up in the App Store. on the hope that with that increased exposure, you would get this kind of organic uplift, they call it. So like people who are perusing the App Store would see your app and then decide, oh, I want to download that. So that was the hope, essentially. So in reality, we did a big push, and you can see we went up quite a bit in the App Store. We weren't number one. This is in the photo and video category, but we got pretty high. And even in the overall, pretty high, but then started to decrease. And I think it's worth noting that the algorithms behind the App Store, so our actual download spike would have been much shorter. And so there's a bit of momentum to the actual App Store rating. Like, if you inject yourself up high, you'll get there, but then it'll take much longer to go down in ranking as opposed to your download number going down, if that makes sense. Yeah. And so we also did a bit of experimentation with paying influencers to post about us, because we'd worked with influencers for free, but we hadn't actually ever paid one to work with us. And so we thought that might be interesting as well. And to this day, that's kind of been the best method of promotion that we found out of all these kind of options, just because, I think it's clear because there's a lot of companies there's one in the DMZ called #paid that does this kind of stuff. It's just, it might be something that gets saturated down the line when more and more people use this, but it's been, I guess it's a reincarnation of an age-old thing where you get celebrities to promote stuff. Now it's social media, young kids that aren't celebrities, but they're social media celebrities, and this guy can make several $1,000s just for posting once on Vine or Instagram, so it's pretty interesting. And so that actually, we did at the same time as the paid installs, so it's lumped into that same graph there. So it's hard to extract those two effects, but in our database we can see more information about the types of the users that were coming in. And so it definitely provided more of like a longer tail to have the influencers than the installs, the paid installs. And then this was the start of kind of a series of really hard things that happened. So Mindy was then featured in the App Store. And this was kind of sad for us because, like I said, they came out after us and then they raised all this money. So this was tough to see, but we, up to this point, had been basically neck and neck with them in the charts. And whereas they raised the 1.2 million American, we had raised much less, and we were still doing as well or better than them in many cases. So we were pretty proud of that, but this happened, and so we rolled with it. What can you do? And moreover, so I got this email from Apple, and when I saw it, I was like, holy crap, we've done it. We're featured in the App Store. And actually, it was an App Store notice saying, we received a notice from the Recording Industry Association of America that your app is infringing on their intellectual property rights, and please see their comments. And their comment is, please remove your app from the App Store. So not only were we not featured, but we also were told that we had to remove our app from the App Store, which really was hard to take and was like, it felt like we were going to lose a year and a bit of our lives of work in a second if this was actually enforced by Apple. So that was kind of scary because it felt out of our control. But I won't get too much into the whole legality over what we're doing here, but essentially, I think it's a gray area right now because of all the APIs we were using and whether it was promoting the music or taking away from sales. I would obviously argue that it was promoting more than taking away, if at all taking away. So we just, we emailed back and we said, we think there's been a mistake, and we moved on. So then I got an email from Sony, and I was thinking, okay, crap, this is not good. But it was actually someone who's the head of business development at Sony Canada. And he'd seen the app, and he was very interested in what we were doing. And so he wanted to meet up and talk about how to use the app to help his artists, which is, I think, much more logical than trying to get us off the App Store. So this seemed really good, and we talked to them. But then pretty quickly, we started to talk to the head of business development in America from New York, and she wasn't as excited about just the pure promotional value of what we were doing. And she kind of applied the brakes a bit. And we had a bunch of back and forth, which I won't get into, but we were trying to get a partnership with One Direction, and then that kind of tanked. And we had several calls where we had to defend our legality, and it was just a big, it was a lot of time spent that didn't really help the company at all. So yeah. And then an app called Dubsmash came out. Have you guys heard of that? Yeah. So almost everyone has heard of that. So that one is really interesting. It's kind of a competitor to Jamcam, but not exactly. So it came out in Germany first, I believe. And essentially what it did is it made it really easy to kind of make yourself look funny by saying a quote and having it dubbed over with the person who actually said the quote originally. And so you could do like, Simpsons or whatever. And sometimes there were songs, but it's mostly about quotes and like looking funny and communicating with friends that way. And so we saw that and we were thinking, oh, that's kind of cool. It's not a competitor, but it's an interesting thing. And it was just exploding in Germany. And within, I'll show you guys the graph later, but within a very short period of time, they were like #1 in the App Store worldwide. So yeah, I'll talk more about that later. So at this point in the story, this was like December 2014, and we landed a meeting with this VC who was there. He's based out of Menlo Park, but he was the first investor in Snapchat. And so he seemed like a pretty impressive guy, and we flew down to meet him. And he actually brought in one of the co-founders of Vine into the meeting to talk to us. And that was really cool because this guy was a smart guy, he was humble, but he'd started Vine, which at the time was still not quite in its heyday, but it was pretty high up in the App Store. So, nonetheless, it was a huge cultural movement, the Vine, when it came out. So it's cool to meet him. And there were kind of a few things that we noted there. One was in terms of the personality of this VC. He's a bit aggressive, and we met a lot of others that were easier to deal with. So, we got a bad vibe from him. But moreover, he kind of made us realize the importance of understanding the key numbers behind your startup. And I think this is different for different types of startups, but certainly for mobile apps or any kind of consumer-centric startup, these numbers kind of hold for a lot of different categories. And these are kind of the VC from New York. What he said was what he looks for and what he saw in Snapchat before anyone else did, which kind of revealed that it had huge potential. So his story is he saw Snapchat when it had 100,000 users, but he heard that his daughter was using it at school. And so he pursued Evan, the founder of Snapchat, quite a bit, and it took a long time to get into contact with him. And then when he did, he found out about their actual metrics, and he asked for these two particular ones, and they were outstanding. And so that was why he was so eager to invest. So for retention, so what this investor told us is that 40% is pretty good for a startup. But as you can see, if you're Facebook and you're off the charts, 99% is what they're at after 1 month. So that means that for a certain number of people that come in after day 0, after 1 month, what percentage is left over? So 99%. Twitter, on the other hand, is 40% currently, apparently. But engagement is the really interesting one. How many of you guys have heard of DAU over MAU before? Is that something you guys? So if you're thinking about making an app or any kind of consumer thing, this is like the most important number, in my opinion, to look at. So what that means is your daily active users over monthly active users. I should say, not my opinion. I just copied this other investor's opinion, so it's his opinion, and I guess I agree with it. So what that means is if you have a certain number of users who use your app in a month, you want a big chunk of those, really as much as possible, to use it every day. And it's kind of a no-brainer when you put it that way, because it just means the more frequently your users use your app, the better. But to quantify it, 30% is really good. To give it some perspective, Facebook has a DAU over MAU of 50%. So if you think about that, I think they have over 1 billion users, and half of those use it every day. That's insane if you think about that. Snapchat is even higher. It's 60%, which kind of makes sense because it's more of a communication tool. So if you ever get a snap, you'll want to return it or something like that. And of course, there's some fine print here. It just talks about how the actual target number kind of depends on what your use case is. So for example, a communication tool might be different than a video watching tool or whatever, but I think the underlying message is the same. And so I'm assuming not many of you have heard of a cohort analysis then, if you haven't heard of DAU for MAU. So some people have. This is something I didn't know about when I started JamCam, and I really embarrassed myself in front of some investors when I was, because I was an engineer, I thought I knew all about graphs and like how to show information. But it's worth researching what the main kind of language of analytics is in your industry before you go and talk to some top VCs. So to give you as a quick explanation, essentially a cohort analysis is like, a cohort is a group of people who join a product within a certain range of time. So like a cohort would be if if you join Mars in 1 year, you're this year's cohort, you're like 2015 or whatever. And then, so that's the vertical, or the rows are representing that. And the columns are, for each cohort, what was the percentage of users who logged in again that many months later. And so you really want to see basically like over the rows, like the numbers should stay high. So it should be like 100, 90, 89, 88, 88, 88, 88, something like that, like an exponential decay, and then just steady at some constant. So clearly this isn't very good, but most startups aren't very good. Like it's really hard to do this properly. And then the vertical one for the columns is like, you can look at each cohort after 1 month. You can say, okay, well, these cohorts are, if you normalize it for size, they're all equal. So the only thing that's differing is your product. So if you're improving your product, you should be improving your retention. And that's what you can see if you look down the column there. So I don't know if you guys have or have not seen this, but it's really worthwhile understanding and doing for your product. Okay, so with that learning from this investor on Snapchat, we decided to do a focus group because we analyzed our cohorts, and we found that there was this group of girls that were using the app every single day of every month. So it was crazy. Like some people weren't, but these people really were. And so we reached out to them, brought them in, and we kind of talked to them about the product and what they wanted to see done differently or what they liked. And that was really useful, but I feel like also we didn't, we had a product in mind for a big update at this time, and we might not have listened to them enough. So it's really tricky to that's something we didn't have a lot of experience in, how to properly run a focus group, because it's hard to ask someone what they want. You kind of have to infer it, and that's something we're not experts in. So that was tricky, but interesting. And then this happened. So Sam essentially was reaching out to a bunch of artists doing that hustling, and he reached out to the Maroon 5 manager. And Maroon 5, this guy really liked it. He showed it to the band, and they liked the idea. So essentially what we were going to do there is what we'd originally envisioned for Tiesto, but for Maroon 5, and make a crowdsourced music video with all these little snippets from JamCam, and then put them together for one full video. And so it went really well. So we were pretty excited about that. Like that was really cool to see all these people engaging with what we built together, and got us a lot of attention. And BuzzFeed picked it up, and I forgot to put those Google Analytics stuff in there, but that was a lot of traction, a lot of views. So this is where, so this chart shows like another part unveiled, and you can see the first peak there is the paid installs, and it went through the chart, and I didn't want to scale it because that would screw up the rest of it. So anyway, it was like I think 8,000 or 10,000 downloads in one day we had that day, and some of those were bought, others were from like the Viner we mentioned, but that was our biggest day in the history of the app. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty cool. Even though we paid for some of them, to have 10,000 new users in one day, that was cool. And you can see a bit of aftershock there. And it's interesting to note like what actually provides a lasting impact versus what provides just a small spark. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later. Oh yeah, and Maroon 5. So you can see Maroon 5, like the spike in itself was huge and way bigger than Psy or Caden or any of the other people. So they have tens of millions of followers on their social media, and they're all highly engaged. So it's like the perfect storm. That was really cool. And then also the users that we were getting were actually sharing the app with their friends quite a bit because, or not because, but you can see that in the continued kind of increase there, coming up to 5,000. 5,000 per week. I was saying 10,000 per day because that was in one day we got those downloads, and then the rest of the week it was way less. So in total for the week it was like 11,000, but that one day was 10,000. But anyway, this graph is usually per week. So anyway, yeah, 5,000 per week was what we kind of peaked at there after Maroon 5. So that was the end of version 4. And so version 5 is so March 2015, that's been essentially the version that we've had in the app since, or to date. And so for this version, we were thinking, well, we just did a ton of really cool stuff. We're not like at the top of the App Store, but we're getting closer. And so what else can we do? Well, let's try and get featured in the App Store. So to do that, we were thinking, well, let's redesign the app, make it much more beautiful or just clean, all the stuff that Apple loves, and try and tickle their fancy. So it was super minimalist screenshots, kind of like a songs inspired interface at the start, but then it splits off and it does its own thing for you pick a song. And that's kind of one thing that all the previous versions were like, you come in the center, you go left, and then you go right, and it was kind of all over the map. And this version was like a tunnel, and we wanted to make sure that users were like going one step at a time, and it was very simple, so they could go from nothing to a video very easily. And so I got this notification from iTunes Connect, and I was all excited because I was like, oh, maybe we're featured. And it said, your app has been rejected. And this is the first time it had ever happened. And so just scrambling to fix it, it was just because of some terms of service thing, like we had to include like a button to flag videos and stuff like that, which in retrospect probably meant that they were taking us more seriously if they were considering featuring us. And so we fixed it, and finally we got this email, App Store promotional artwork request. And that was like, the hallelujah moment, because that means that there's a really good chance we're gonna get featured in the App Store. So that was another really exciting moment, although I wasn't as excited as that first tweet back from Jordan from TechCrunch, but still pretty excited. And so there it is, JamCam was featured in the App Store. That was pretty cool. And the one thing was that it was only featured in Canada, not in the US App Store. And that was a bit of a letdown, because most of our user base is in the US. So what can you do? And so you can see there, that's the result from being featured in the App Store in Canada. So you might expect it to be a lot bigger, and we certainly did, but it wasn't. And it's just Canada. The US has like a much higher, like all the charts are relative to the country, so it takes way fewer downloads to trend in the Canadian App Store, for example, as opposed to the biggest one, the America App Store. So here you can see, our rank history for Canada, which is that top light blue line. We got really high up in the photo and video section, and we even trended overall. But the red line is the US photo and video section, so we were basically unaffected. So being featured in one country had no impact on being featured in our downloads in another country. So just to give you a bit of an overview of the whole lifetime ranking of JamCam, I should say actually these graphs, I'm showing you two different types of graphs. One is the downloads, these are the rank history. And so something to keep in mind is that downloads are not a linear function with respect to rank in the App Store. Like if you're rank 1 to 100, you're getting way, way, way more downloads than if you're rank 100 to 200 and so on. That just repeats. So that means that it's hard to compare these types of rank graphs and see how many downloads an app will get, because if it spends a little bit of time above you, that's a lot more downloads. So anyway. So you can see we just, we started off pretty high with that initial spike, and then really gradual organic improvement through word of mouth, through promotions, through all that stuff. And yeah. So cumulative downloads, we surpassed 200,000. These are kind of vanity metrics, like they don't tell you much interesting other than just it's going up. So it can't go down if it's cumulative. So views, we surpassed 2 million in the app. Videos made, so interestingly, people don't have to share their video in the app. They can actually just text it to a friend or whatever, just like in the first version. And so only a thin slice of these are actually posted to the social network part of the app. But it's pretty cool that over like 1.5 million videos have been made on JamCam. That's pretty cool. Just for something that started off as a simple tool that I wasn't expecting much of. So, so now what? Yeah. So one thing worth noting is that the main focus for version 5, aside from getting featured, was improving the creation of videos, the number of videos being created. And you can see here that we more or less tripled, almost quadrupled the number of videos being made in the app, but there was more focus towards videos being shared privately instead of publicly, which kind of hurt the view count, and that's why the view count started to slow down there. And so we also decided, okay, well, if we're not going to become the next Snapchat or something like that, what do we do with this app? And so we started to monetize it essentially by featuring lesser known artists in the app. So we might not have millions of users, but still having a couple 100,000 is enough to help out companies that manage these lesser known artists in some way. And so that's what we've been doing as a way to do something with this product that we built. And had a respectable number of downloads, but didn't quite reach the top. So who did reach the top? Well, Dubsmash wasn't exactly a competitor, but I think is a really interesting case study because the guys behind Dubsmash actually had done 3 other apps prior to Dubsmash. And they were actually much more similar to JamCam. And so they kind of saw something that we missed because this was the first product that I had made that had any kind of traction. I didn't know what to look for. But they were very familiar with the notion of doing an MVP and then iterating quickly. And so I think there's a lot of value to that. I mean, I don't think we should have given up necessarily, but maybe been more willing to do drastic changes. And so the one key thing that they realized is that people were turning the camera back on themselves because people love to look cool and sing along with like Justin Bieber or whatever and the artist of the moment is. And that's like a real use case that a lot of people love to do. And we had that data, like we could have observed that, but we didn't because we were so gung-ho about our original idea for making beautiful videos, maybe crowdsourced videos, stuff like that. So that's something they realized and that paid off big time. Musically is the biggest mystery to me in the world because they, like I said, completely copied Mindy's design, everything. And if you compare Musically to our chart here, in the first half it actually looks very similar, steady growth. But then in the second half, it just steadily goes up and up and up, and eventually they reach the top of the App Store. And so they enjoyed quite a few number of days at number 1 in the whole App Store in the US, I think in Canada too. And they've trickled down a bit, but they're clearly right up there right now. And so, yeah, I think Mindy is probably pretty pissed about that. And so Mindy, a few months ago, I emailed the founder or the co-founder of Mindy, and I said, now that the dust has settled, do you want to Skype and chat about it? And he said, sure. And so, I asked him about this and like what he thought about this happening, and he was like, well, that's the game, and this happens, but I think that's easy to say months after the event. I'm sure he was much more pissed off at the time. And I'd still love to talk to Musically someday, but I don't think now's the time to reach out. But it's interesting. And as he said, that's the game. So on that note, if you look now today, this is taken at 12:06 p.m. today. So Dubsmash is getting around 20,000 downloads a day. Musically is getting around 15,000 downloads a day. And Vine is getting 12,000 downloads a day. So you guys recall when I was in the car talking to my friend, should I do JamCam? Is this idea? It's, I don't know, subset of Vine, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's amazing because, you never would have expected it, but that's the way it went. Like, Musically is ahead of Vine in the App Store, and yet most people haven't heard of it. And part of that is because, yes, Vine has been decaying, and I think in total, Musically has been less successful than Vine, but still, comparing them today, I think it's impressive that an app which you would think would be a subset in terms of interests has actually surpassed a more broadly targeted app. So yeah. Okay, so just a few personal takeaways from this. I think there's a lot of variables that come into play in terms of reaching the top of the App Store, becoming the next Snapchat, the next whatever. And I think luck is a big part of it. I feel like that was a big part of it for Musical.ly, but I think also they did some things that were very smart, like some different recording techniques that Mindy and Jamcam didn't have, some stuff like that, like rankings, and they really played on the vanity card. Like, they really made it easy for people in Musical.ly to feel like they were the best. And then hard work, just learning the language, working hard every day, I think is really important. And then having some kind of vision. I think vision can kind of be brute forced. So Dubsmash, as I said, it was their 4th attempt. So, it's not like they were some kind of Steve Jobs prodigy where they're like, this is the way to go. But they iterated quickly, and they had the vision in the end. And that was something that we lacked in some degrees, in some ways. Although we did have the idea that a music video app could be something. So there's some vision there as well. And so on that note, with the what Dubsmash saw that we didn't, the idea that if you shouldn't be too stuck with your idea of what might be successful or what will work out. I think it's really important to be really willing to check your ego at the door and just throw out parts of your original idea which you thought were so critical, and just iterate as you learn more about the environment and as you interact with it. I think that would have helped us a lot. And yeah, I think one other thing is that if you set out with a goal of creating the next Snapchat, I think you're setting yourself up for failure, because as far as my research, I've watched interviews and stuff, and from my experience in the industry, none of the people who created these unicorns initially were intending to create a unicorn. It wasn't their goal, or certainly not their only goal. So I think what's more important is trying to find an idea that will have product market fit. And you can only do that by quickly iterating and experimenting and trying to have some degree of vision. So I think it's risky if you try and set out with that in mind. And again, when I started Jamcam, I thought I might just charge $1 for it, make a couple $1,000s and move on. But as it went and it got some attention, I thought I might as well try to grow it as big as possible. And I think we did pretty well, I think. And so just on that note, one of the last things, so growth hacking, I think is this term that's kind of used in a weird way, and I think it has like maybe a negative connotation now, because it's kind of about like ways to cheat and get yourself further along. And I think what's more important is, instead of finding new ways to find new sparks or to find kind of new quick little things, it's very, very important to find that initial product first. And you can figure that out in a short amount of time using the engagement metrics that I was telling you earlier about, instead of having to wait months and measure retention and find out then. So if you only wait a few weeks and measure your DAU over MAU, or a month, then you can know very quickly if you have product market fit or not. So there's kind of a formulaic way to at least understand when you should iterate a bit more. And I think that's part of the subtlety of being an entrepreneur, is that there's a lot of assumptions that are in this hierarchy, right? Like, the first one is, will people want to have a music video app that you sing along with? That is a huge assumption, and it very well could have been the case that the answer was no. And as it turns out, the answer was yes, but it just wasn't Jamcam. And so that's another layer lower in the hierarchy would be, is it going to be you, someone else? What difference in the implementation would cause theirs to be successful where yours wasn't? And then so on. So I think that's the tricky thing, and there's some nuance to deciding when do you give up, when do you keep going. I think that's tricky, but important to do. And the last thing I would say is don't do a startup in the music industry, because that was really hard, and there's enough hard stuff in a startup, so if you're considering that, I would just advise against it, but if you really love it, then go for it. So yeah, that's what I have to say.